Right, so today I wanted to make this video about racism. I guess I've kind of made videos about it, but I wanted to talk a little more about it, and I wanted to debunk the whole myth, and I think it's a myth that a lot of people, even on the right, still kind of believe in, and pretty well everyone on the left. But it's the myth that whites are the most racist race in, let's just say, North America. Just not to get too in depth for your other races, but so basically, this was a Pew Research polls, I guess, and they did a lot of other stuff too, but I wanted to talk about this. And I guess just as a caveat to kind of throw in, they did do a lot of other stuff that like showed that blacks still feel like their race is still a detriment and getting them ahead compared to others and stuff like that that may point towards uh, racism, but I mean, my opinion is that I think every race definitely experiences racism, and I think that one of the big reasons why blacks would think that is that they're constantly bombarded over and over on the mainstream media in school and college that there's there's this horrible racism among mostly whites these days that it's always against them, and most people, I wouldn't say most people, but a lot of people on the left, I could say that maybe is most, to be honest, but they believe that blacks can't even, it's not even possible for them to be racist towards other races, and it's not even possible for whites to experience racism from, namely, blacks or Hispanics. And that's a very toxic thing that I think that that's one of the big things that contributes towards that stuff. If we stop teaching a generation of blacks about slavery and constantly told them, thousands of times by the time they're adults that they were bad and that they're racist and this and that, I would bet money that um, the number of blacks that viewed themselves as their race as being a detriment to them getting ahead compared to other races would go down drastically. And I think most people would agree with that. But getting into this, so this was the study, or the poll, I guess, and they found that blacks are more likely than any other race to see their race as a key part of their culture or identity, the central to their identity. And I would point out, for starters, is that if being black was such a detriment in society nowadays, then why would so many blacks view it as a benefit to being black? I mean, that just makes no sense. And if you're going to see your race as central to your identity, then you have to believe that it's a positive thing. Like, you can't think that it's a negative thing. Like, nobody thinks that, being, having a horrible birthmark on their face or being extremely overweight, at least unless you're in one of these fat pride movements, as central to their identity, right? No one thinks that. So if being black is so horrible, then we should see the opposite trend in that black should, a very, very small portion of black should see um, their race and or their race is a key part of their identity. And if whites were so overwhelmingly racist, and the most racist race in North America, namely the U.S., then we should see like the overwhelming majority of whites viewing their race as a key part of their identity. Because if it's a white supremacist culture, and you have people like Justin Trudeau and a lot of people, even the U.S. Leftists, claiming that white nationalism is this horrible issue we got to address because it's so bad and it's getting huge. Well, we should see that a vast majority of whites should see their race as essential to their identity, but if we don't, it's the exact opposite. And that's just another way of disproving people like Justin Trudeau. And I mean, it's a monkey could disprove a lot of his arguments. But getting back to this kind of stuff is that, like I mentioned, if being black was so, I mean, on average, I'm just going to say on average because obviously there's certain individual instances, but on average, if being black was a detriment to you and your ability to get ahead, then blacks shouldn't we shouldn't see this number. It should be the opposite. We should be able to basically see the reverse between whites and blacks. And this is another thing that always comes up when debating with the left on a lot of issues, is that they tend to face the conundrum of they'll they'll they always accuse you of what they're thinking or what their beliefs are. Maybe they might not be open about it, but either their argument that blacks experience the most racism is completely wrong, or blacks are stupid. And this may be taken out of context, but I'm going to explain it, so please don't. Um, if blacks experience the most racism and yet they view their race as a key part of their identity, then they must be too, unintelligent to realize that you shouldn't want to experience or have your race as a key part of your identity, because being black is, on average, a detriment in society today. So um, you would be very unintelligent to view your race as a key part of your identity. So you have the people on the left who think that blacks experience all this racism, but yet they're dumb enough to think that to view their race as a key part of their identity. So you have to pick one or the other. Basically, either they're ignorant or they're not ignorant. If they're ignorant, then the left is wrong, and if they're not ignorant, the left is wrong. And they seem to pick the ignorant one, unfortunately, which is why another reason why the left is more racist too, and that's been happening like that for hundreds of years now. But also the Hispanic and Asian. Hispanic not quite as much. Asian, I would say Asian is much higher than whites, because no one ever rags on Asians for having such a strong in-group preference. You look at, this is I guess the other big thing to get at with this argument, is that the left doesn't even believe their own arguments that having a very strong in-group preference is wrong. Because you never hear anyone on the left ragging on Japan because they don't let in any migrants. Japan has been offered migrants, but they don't take any of them in. And you don't hear anyone on the left ragging on them. But when someone like Trump doesn't want any, or reduced amount, then they're horrible racists. No one ever rags on any overwhelmingly black or Islamic countries for not having more whites or Asians in their country, because they don't care about that. They only care about increasing the diversity in the white countries, because the white countries tend to be more conservative and Republican, or whatever you want to call it. Whites as a whole, especially white men, which is why white men are the devil according to the left, is that they're 70-80%, maybe even more conservative voters, or libertarian even. And white women, even to not quite as much of a degree, are more conservative. But that's the main reason why the left always rags on whites, and they tend to ignore all the other races having an in-group preference. And why they're doing this is because it's more or less a projection thing, and they want to hold other people to standards that they're not going to hold themselves to, right? Because they know that in a debate, or a long-standing debate in society, the group that has the stronger in-group preference is going to win almost every time. And you look in history, a group that had an in-group preference compared to a tribe, or let's say tribe, that didn't have an in-group preference, the one that had the in-group preference was going to win every time. And biologically, that still exists in humans. It's not quite as important nowadays, but biologically it's been like that for tens of thousands of years. So, and they know that, so what they're going to do is they're going to claim that they're going to go to white people, and they're going to claim that having an in-group preference is the worst thing ever, but they're going to have a very strong in-group preference with the people that agree with them, namely your Islamic and black cultures. So that's about it as far as this video goes. If you liked it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.